Before the main part of the podcast, I would like to give a little shout out to the University of Hertfordshire, who are doing a doctoral study on something that is often overlooked in academia. They're conducting research into the experiences of parents or carers who help to look after a child or children where the family has a parent that has mental health difficulties. Now, that is a bit of a mouthful, but what they're looking for are people that are supporting a family where the parent or a parent has a mental health condition and you're supporting their child within the family. And this study is aiming to learn more about the experiences of parents and carers who look after a child or children in the family where the parent has a mental health difficulty. So, for example, this is if someone has a parent that has been living with bipolar or any other kind of mental health issue. So in this situation, what they're looking for are people such as the partner of the parent who is suffering from a mental health issue, the grandparents, older siblings, aunts and uncles, and so that's anyone that is really providing support to the child who is living with a parent that has a mental health issue. And these people will be often providing emotional support for the child. They may also help out with household chores and so forth. And these people are really important to the family and supporting the family generally. However, there's been a lack of research done on this area. So the guys at the University of Hertfordshire are looking for people who are looking after a child or children aged 4 to 17 with a parent that has a mental health difficulty. So this could be officially diagnosed or it could not be. So it doesn't really matter if it's diagnosed or not. Participants are expected or should be willing to take part in an interview with the researcher to talk about your experiences. And what will happen is that it will go into the larger study for the researchers to find out more about how your support is impacting the family and yourself. If you are willing to help out in this research, you will be asked to take part in an hour-long interview, and this interview and its location is generally flexible depending on your individual needs. And if you are nowhere near Hertfordshire, they can do the interview via Skype with you. So if there's anyone out there that's listening to this podcast and you think that you fit this criteria and you would like to find out more about how you can get involved with this research, all you need to do is send an email to r.bishop@hearts.ac.uk, or you can tweet at BeccaJBG. I will put all of this in the show notes for you so that if you are interested and would like to participate, you can easily find the information. I think that this piece of research will be invaluable to those that are looking after or helping out a family who has mental health issues ongoing. And you telling them your own personal experiences can help with them supporting other people who find themselves in the situation as well as yourself. So that was just a little bit of a shout out to this research study being conducted at the University of Hertfordshire by Becca. So good luck, Becca, in your recruitment of participants. Hello and welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and Becky Lawrence. We would like to take this opportunity to let you know that we will be covering a diverse range of mental health topics that may be distressing to some listeners. You can find a full list of the topics being covered in each episode in the show notes. Please check the show notes before listening to any of our episodes. Welcome to the Mental Health Book Club podcast with your hosts Sydney Timmins and
Becky Lawrence.
Here at the Mental Health Book Club, we would like to give a big shout out to Nicole Hellier, who has become our first patron on Patreon, coming in at the bronze level, which means that she now gets access to the Patreon-only feed, which means that she'll get the next episode that we talk about the book a week in advance, as well as eligibility for free giveaways. We really do appreciate all of your support, and if you'd like to find out more about Patreon and what you can do to support the Mental Health Book Club podcast, please visit patreon.com/MHBC. You can always follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. You could give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. And you could share us with your family and friends. So anything you can do, we really do appreciate it. Today we're going to be reading Am I Normal Yet by Holly Bourne.
And on Amazon, it received a 4.6 stars from 115 reviews. Goodreads a 4.31 stars from 5,653 reads and 1,038 reviews. Sydney gave it 5 stars and so did I. I really enjoyed this book. It was one of the ones I felt was a really good representation and also very easily accessible.
Me too. For a change, we seem to agree.
We do. And the blurb says,
all Evie wants is to be normal. She's almost off her meds and at a new college where no one knows her as the girl who went crazy. She's even going to parties and making friends. There's only one thing left to tick off her list. But relationships are messy, especially relationships with teenage guys. They can make any girl feel like they're going mad. And if Evie can't even tell her new friends Amber and Lottie the truth about herself, how will she cope when she falls in love?
Okay, so Evie is our main character here, and we pick up after she is starting to make a recovery after having quite a large OCD episode.
Or at least when her symptoms were extremely intense and she found it hard to cope with everyday life.
Yeah. And she's still seeing a psychologist on a weekly basis. She's still having to go through steps to help herself. And you see that in the book with little subtitles where she's talking about the bad thoughts she's having and how she's kind of counter them with the good thoughts she's having and trying to work with the way that she's feeling.
And we are joining her as she's trying to come off her medication that she's been taking to control her OCD. And unfortunately, during this time and through the book, we see her get herself to a point where she is falling back into her old ways and that she is not coping as well as she had done when she was on the medication.
Yeah. And this seems to be maybe because she's coming off the meds and it's just what has happened, but it also seems to be triggered by her environment, the fact that she can't tell her friends about what's happening because she feels they won't like her anymore. She's trying to date and the whole thing that comes with teenage dating and and boys and how they make her feel. So she's not only got the normal teenage angst of not knowing if someone likes you or not, on top of that she's got all these added pressures
from her anxiety and the compulsive need to do repetitive actions. One of the things that she says in the book, and I think Holly Bourne has mentioned it in some interviews that she has done, is the fact that Evie is kind of in some ways upset that it's the normal type of OCD or the typical type of OCD that people associate when they are told about OCD, if that makes sense. So that's the repetitive touching of things, the obsession with washing hands and germs and all of that side of things, rather than the other side of OCD. So we'll do an episode on OCD later on, but what we'll do with this particular podcast is focus on what it has in the book. So that's the obsessive touching and washing and other obsessive behaviours that we see from Evie.
Yeah, where she actually feels that if she doesn't wash her hands again, she's going to get sick.
Her family's going to get sick.
Yeah, her family's going to get sick and it'll all be down to her. She could, And it also, I found it quite interesting how it also linked to whether she was going to have a good day or a good night. So if she didn't touch every lamppost 6 times, she wasn't going to have a good time at the party she was walking to.
There was this relationship, wasn't it? That if you did the repetitive action, then, as you said, the good thing would happen, or the thing that she wanted to happen.
It was almost like trying to get fate on your side by
predicting the future as well. Kind of like, if I do this, then it is bound to.
And then when that doesn't work out, then you can't have done it properly, which means you've then got to do it more times next time, or you've got to do something slightly different, or you've got to make sure. So if you think you've got to touch something 3 times, well, you've got to do it 6 times just to be sure you've done it those 3 times. And then if that hasn't worked, then it's 12 times because maybe you didn't match all 6, maybe you missed a couple. And so it's this, real obsession with going back and doing things over and over again because you hadn't done it right. And it's this, again, I think she feels defective, and we've seen this quite a lot in the way that she feels she can't do anything right, and therefore she has to do these things to try and cover those up.
Yeah.
And I think one of the pressures which causes her to maybe have a relapse is the pressures she's feeling with from her parents and her home life to not stress them out by going back, by being normal, as she calls it, all the way through. The fact the book is like, am I normal yet? Is her fight continuously to feel normal and to be normal. And she feels if she can somehow get a boy to like her, then she'll be normal.
Because that's what everyone else is doing. So therefore, if she does it, then she's on the right direction.
Even though not everyone is. One of the friends that she makes, Amber, actually doesn't have a boy throughout the book at all. Whereas Lottie does.
Lottie has lots of boys, let's be honest. And to be honest, reading this book, I don't necessarily remember being that boy crazy when I was that age, but then that was quite some time ago.
Yeah, I mean, being a teacher of teenagers, it does come earlier these days than I think when we were young. Plus, I don't think we were in the group that probably necessarily was so focused on boys.
I was more focused on education because I was a nerd.
Yeah. So, but there are groups that, were and are, and there is a stress and a pressure to, to have a boyfriend and to be cool and to go to the right parties and all of those things that she feels will make her normal.
But ultimately backfire.
Yeah.
Because teenage boys may not be relationship material.
Even her counsellor turns around when she says that she likes this boy and she's thinking about going on a date. She's like, whoa, boys are crazy even for the best of people. Teenage boys, really? And she does go, after it all goes wrong, she does almost do the I told you so. Like,
yeah, but if you're a teenager, I never listen to anyone.
Of course not.
So you've got to, unfortunately, learn these lessons for yourself. You can't just go on what other people are telling you.
Yeah. And I think she does, all teenagers want to be normal, all of them. And I'm always telling them at school, it's okay to be weird and wonderful, and that makes us all
That's because
amazing.
You are weird.
It's true. I am weird and wonderful, and I embrace it.
I didn't mention the wonderful part. I just said the weird part. Just saying. No. Yeah, all right. I'll let you have wonderful.
And it is about, embracing that. But unfortunately, as a teenager, all your impulses are to try and be the same as everyone else and yet be slightly different because you need to stand out. But then you also can't stand out too much. You have to be you. And it's just, there's a whole conflict going on that, no one knows how to navigate.
Hands up. I don't think I would want to be a teenager ever again.
No.
It's a good job we don't go backwards.
Especially with selfies and stuff. I hate having my photograph taken, and they don't understand it because their photographs are everywhere. So, yeah, social media is the bane of my life as a teacher. It means the bullies aren't at school, they follow you home.
That's always
scary.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't escape.
Yeah. Anyway, so she does feel this pressure to see boys and to make friends and to not tell them what is going on.
I don't know. I think that's fair enough. Even as an adult, I don't know if I would turn around and go, oh yeah, by the way, I have borderline personality disorder and I have multiple sclerosis and everything else.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily...
Here is my history, blah.
Yeah. It's not going to be a relationship winner, I don't think. And just in case my husband listens to this, I'm not planning on dating anytime soon. Just in case, you never know. You never know.
Yeah. Well, I think that she is... I understand her not telling her friends at first.
Me
I
too.
think eventually she should have done, but
then she has all the
when do you bring it
pressure.
up?
Yeah, exactly. Well, if you haven't done it straight
offer
away,
you a pizza, and she goes, "Sorry, I can't eat that pizza
because I've got OCD."
Yeah, and I don't know the people that bake it.
And I've seen your house, and I've seen you, and your room is disgusting. And yeah.
Especially as she brings up a really interesting point in part of the book where she says, sometimes I can do these things. I can hold someone's hand. But then afterwards, I'm like, oh my God, what did I do? And so she says, but some people would then go, oh, but you can do it. I've seen you only wash your hands once and walk away. But she's like, yeah, but sometimes it gets to me more than others. And so sometimes I can't and sometimes I can. And it depends what I'm feeling and the environment and what's going on. And she brings up a good point in the book that actually, if you have OCD, it doesn't mean you're like it all the time, constantly, necessarily.
Yes.
And I thought that was a really interesting point that she was like, especially like when she was in kissing boys and stuff.
Yeah.
And at first she was like, I don't even know how this is going to happen because of germs and tongues and all that kind of stuff. You don't know if he's brushed his teeth or where things have gone. Who knows?
I don't want to know where things have gone.
I know. So, but when she's in the throes of passion, and by that I mean kissing and snogging, she kind of lets it go. But it's only afterwards where she's like, oh my God, I need to shower. I need to scrub myself. I need to brush my teeth, And so I found that really sort of like interesting how it allowed her to sometimes let go, but then at other times she would not let her go.
No, and you can also see the escalation as the meds drop. You can see the increase in the need, and it's an overwhelming need. It's not something that you can logically say no to. It's you have to do it or something bad is going to happen.
Yeah, and if you are being threatened by, your family might die because if you don't wash your hands again, those germs, you're going to get sick. Those germs will make your family sick. That means everyone's going to die that you love. You can understand why it's almost like putting a gun to someone's head and asking you to do something. It's that important. That's what they really feel like it's happening.
And I can definitely understand how that association can occur in their minds or in people's minds that suffer with OCD. And whilst I don't suffer with OCD, I can fully understand and empathise why that would occur, because I have these overwhelming emotions that will ultimately drive me to do something. And it is an overwhelming emotion that these people are suffering with. That means that they have to keep doing a certain thing constantly.
Yeah, and people think, oh, just don't do it, but it's a compulsion. It's a
not that easy.
No, it's not. And I mean, she's washing her hands to the point where they are bleeding.
Yeah, and to the point where she puts bleach on herself.
Yeah,
which causes burns. She burns her skin off.
Yeah, she's going to have scars for this. This isn't, I wash my hands extras once a day. This is, she's washing her hands, her body, her clothes. She's spraying antibacterial spray on her bed linen on a regular basis. She and her friends comment, oh, it smells nice of pine in here. But actually, this is because of her compulsion to spray over and over again,
And also to wash everything. I think she's limited to washing her bed sheets once a week and things like that. So her parents are trying to help her, but I also question whether the way that her parents are dealing with it is the best way.
It's not really accepting the issue. It is trying to control the issue, I believe.
And I mean, from the descriptions that we get of her mother, there is obviously something clearly wrong with her as well. There's some kind of issue associated with being surprised by her getting a normal life and asking people round to the house without checking. And don't get me wrong, I can kind of understand why maybe her mum would want someone to warn her, but she's getting to the point where she is now 17, she's trying to get a life of her own. Why shouldn't she invite her friends over?
And she even points out to her parents that actually you wanted this for me. You didn't think this was going to happen when I had my first instant of all this happening and I ended up in hospital. So now it's happening and you're trying to stop it and restrict it and control it.
It's a confusing message, isn't it?
It is. And I think, again, being a parent of a teenager must be difficult to have the right level of control, but also freedom to allow the expression and the development of that young person into a young adult, but at the same time control enough that they don't get into trouble.
Yeah, it must be a difficult line to toe between those two things.
And I think they are finding that. The bit I really had issues with was the way that they were trying to get her to not open up or speak to her sister.
Me too.
And to try and protect her sister from her. And
as if it was some kind of disease that could be passed on to her sister, because I think at points she's like, don't come too near because I'm doing my weird thing or something.
Yeah, and even her sister Rose says, you're not contagious.
Rose is so amazing in this book. The way that Holly has written Rose just shows how understanding a 12-year-old can be of their older sister who may be having some mental health issues.
Yeah, I mean, even Evie turns around and says, you're so wise for your age. Like, how do you get this? How do you, and partly because of the experiences she's had to deal with, she will have grown up a little bit quicker. Even if they are trying to protect her, she's still seeing her sister go through this. So I can kind of understand why she's a bit wiser. But at the same time, it's amazing that she can be there and try and support her. And when she is having boy issues, she goes, look, it's boy issues. Everyone has these issues. Like, everyone would be worried about what to wear before their first date. This isn't an OCD thing. This is a normal thing. This is a teenage thing. Yeah.
This is normal. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. And so she's able to help her distinguish between them, which I thought was really interesting.
And them not speaking about it, particularly with Rose, you do wonder how that then gives out a message that you shouldn't talk about mental health.
Yeah.
And that's perpetuating the issue.
I think so. I think Evie feels that she can't, when she does start to realise, and she does know partway through the book that it's going downhill. It's coming back. she doesn't open up to people because she feels
she shouldn't be going downhill, and she's scared to tell them because of their reaction.
Yeah. And they are going to blame her rather than understand. And at the end, when she does have the major relapse, she does turn around and apologise to her mum and stuff.
And her mum is so amazing.
Yeah.
From someone who is dead set against her telling her younger sister what is happening, at the end of the book, she's like, it's not your fault.
Yeah.
It's just that you have OCD and this is just the way it's going to be for you.
And I think she even says, I've spoken to Sarah, your counsellor, and we've discussed what's happened. And I think maybe that they needed help to accept what OCD was, what it meant for their family, what it meant for Evie, what it means for the parents. Because when you do have a mental health issue, it doesn't just affect you, it does affect the people around you. And people don't know how to deal with it because we're not taught how to deal with it. So instead, no one talks about it. Whereas actually, after she seems to have had a bit of counselling herself about it, she seems to be able to accept and not be as judgmental and actually accept Evie for who she is. And being OCD is going to be part of who she is.
So I think maybe one of the key messages from this book is to try and accept a mental health diagnosis and talk about it as a family. And no matter how difficult it is, the other family members are not necessarily going to catch it. They may learn by experience and by observing. And if you don't explain to them what's going on, they may pick up on the things that you potentially destructive for them. But if you don't talk about it openly, how are you ever going to process it?
And you're taking away someone's support system. You can tell that those sisters are so close. Before this even happened, they were close. They watched movies together. They got, snuggled up together.
She strokes her hair.
Yeah. And
we have a friend like that. If you play with her hair, that's it. She's like comatose. It's quite funny to watch.
She barely gets through the first 10 minutes of any movie if you start stroking her hair. So I think that you can see the bond that they've got. And to try and break that bond, I think is actually more damaging to Evie and Rose and both their mental health than it is otherwise, which is why throughout the book you find it starts to feed that there is something going on with Rose and you don't know what it is.
Because she hides what's happening, doesn't she?
Yeah, because she doesn't want to also be a problem and she doesn't want to cause an issue. Whereas actually, I think if they'd encouraged them to be more open with each other,
they could have used each other as a support system.
Yeah. And we do rely on each other. Yes, she's young and you shouldn't be asking her to do things that grown-ups should be doing. But at the same time, she is also a sister.
And is there to offer any support that she can. Again, Rose seems, like we said, she seems older than she should be at 12 years old. But you can tell that she really wants to help her older sister.
Yeah. Well, she's always popping her head in to check on her. She's always, when she is upset, even if she doesn't want to talk about it, she says, oh, well, let's watch a movie and just spend time together. And
that's all you need sometimes, isn't it? Just some companionship and...
Yeah, and she wants to see her sister happy. And you can really tell that in the book, the way that it's written. I think those two characters are so well developed and written. I think she's done a really good job there.
There was also a bit in the book that describes the onset of her OCD and how it impacted her life and how her friend Jane was there and was a real support to her. As we go through the book, we see that Jane begins to change because of influences of her new boyfriend, Joel. And so we see that as a result of Joel, that Jane is in some ways distancing herself from Evie. But it also has a bit in the book that talks about when she was diagnosed, she was actually misdiagnosed to begin with, which I had a quick Google, and it's actually quite common for people with OCD to be misdiagnosed with an eating disorder as a result of OCD. And it's during a section where Evie is thinking about telling or potentially telling someone that she has OCD, and she says, I wonder what they'd do if I leaned over and said, the funniest thing happened when I was 14. I, completely stopped eating because I thought all food was contaminated and would make me sick. Hilarious, huh? I dropped, 2 stone initially. Great diet, I know. And then, there was this one time when my mum tried to force feed me. She held me down and globbed mashed potato around my face, crying and screaming. Just eat, Evie. But I wouldn't. And then I collapsed and they took me to hospital and misdiagnosed me with anorexia. So funny, right? And then I was super thin and still wouldn't eat, so they sectioned me. and it took them like weeks to finally diagnose me with OCD and generalised anxiety disorder. So anyway, have you guys ever been sectioned?
Yeah, not really the everyday teenager conversation.
No, bit of a conversation killer, I would say.
Yeah.
And as you can see, when we discussed a little bit earlier the difficulties with coming out with some of your past history, but this also issue with misdiagnosis, that she would be being treated for anorexia when in fact it was something completely different.
Yeah. I mean, so what because you have to kind of work out what came first, the not eating because you think food's contaminated, or the fear of contamination and therefore you don't eat, or you don't eat. So I suppose it's all tied in together and wondering what came first kind of thing. So I imagine it is difficult, especially as that's probably the most visual symbol that they had to begin with, a symptom.
Yeah, and whether she would be open enough to say, look, I think food is contaminated, that's why I'm not eating it.
Yeah.
Or whether they are just going, well, you wanted to control something, so that's why you stopped eating.
Yeah.
It's a difficult one, I think.
And traumatic to be force-fed mashed potato.
Yes, I don't think that would be something I would have really appreciated.
No, I can't eat mashed potato to this day because I was force-fed mashed potato when I wouldn't eat.
I don't quite understand why mashed potato.
I suppose easier to go down, but it's not when you're force-fed it.
I don't think anything is easy to go down when you're force-fed, personally.
No. But yeah, I think that I found that part of that book most traumatic was the force-feeding of the mashed potato.
There's also another really interesting bit that shows just how much OCD is impacting Evie's life and her life choices, particularly when she's talking about the choices for her college subjects. So she says that she can't study psychology, obvious reason that if she starts to learn about the psychology and the issues associated with psychology, she might then end up having them all herself. There's also the issue with geography, that she can't necessarily do geography, because what about volcanoes? If she starts to learn about volcanoes and earthquakes and things, she's now going to be paranoid and panicked about the fact that she could get caught up in a volcano or an earthquake or something.
Or biology, because then she's worrying about cancer.
French, Spanish or German. Well, why bother learning a different language when you're not going to leave the country anyway?
Yeah. So she ends up with sociology, film studies and English language because those are safe. And it's during her film studies that she meets Ollie, which was, although she meets several boys in this book, was one that I in particular wanted to talk about because he actually does, it takes a while, but he eventually asks her out on a date. They are going to go to the cinema and then she gets there and he's brought his parents along.
That's kind of a first date killer.
Yeah. And so at first she's like, okay,
why has he got his parents here?
What have I done? She turns it on herself and then they go in and he goes, oh, we don't have to sit with them. So
well, that's a good thing.
It's a bonus. So they sit separately and they watch the movie and she's obsessing about the fact that this has happened. Why has it happened? What's going on? And then afterwards they go for a cup of coffee where she makes the slight joke. Do you want to go to the same place your parents are going for coffee, or can we go to our own place? Which I thought was a little bit sarcastic, a little bit, but it was funny. And then so they go and have a coffee, and in the end she just goes, look, what's going on? And that's where he turns around and says, you know, he has mental health issues with, well, he says, I've got anxiety issues. I haven't left the house. I don't usually go out and things. And that's where he's only just been able to get to college. He wasn't sure about asking her out, but then he does because he really likes her.
But then he's worried, and so he brings his parents.
Yeah, and then he thinks, oh my God, I've brought my parents, and it just feeds the anxiety.
And he does.
And he cries.
Yeah, he ends up in rather an emotional state because, I don't know about you, but it's one of those situations where you go, it's a first date, and it's all going horribly wrong, and this is the reason why. Because I've got this giant mental health cloud above me, and
I've just admitted it to someone and they haven't said anything back yet. And I've just brought my parents and my parents aren't here now and I'm now here and I don't know what to do. And that you can just hear the panic.
And the anxiety increasing in him. Yeah. My heart broke for poor Ollie. And the problem is that I think Evie doesn't necessarily handle it in the best way.
She doesn't know how. She doesn't know how to handle her own,
which is
alone accept someone else's mental health issues. And therefore she does kind of just go, all right then, and takes him back to his parents and kind of gives him back and then basically legs it.
Yeah. And she's like, here's your son. He's in a bit of a state, but see ya.
Yeah. And she's like, they gave me an evil, like I'd done something really bad. And she's like, she felt like going, I haven't. He just got really upset, but she didn't know what to say. So she just left.
Which is kind of understandable. But then again, if you are living in a family where you're not necessarily discussing mental health issues, if someone does disclose to you a mental health issue, how do you respond to it? Yeah. She didn't necessarily, I think she does talk, you get the internal monologue of her saying, well, why didn't I turn around and go, so have I know where you're coming from.
Well, through the rest of the book, she feels
beats
guilty.
Herself up.
Because he doesn't appear at school afterwards, and she's still going, he's not at school, I should text him, but I don't. I should do this, but I don't. And all the way through, she's still got this little sort of feed of it going through, that actually she should have done something. And yet she also admits to herself that she doesn't know what to do about it and doesn't know how to deal with it herself.
And at the end, she does reach out to him.
Yeah.
After her other disastrous boy moments.
Yes.
She does reach out to Ollie and texts him and says, how are you doing?
Yeah. And we need to chat.
Yeah.
You know, got a lot to share with you, basically. I think as well, though, I think it's also that fear that he could then tell her friends as well.
Do you think?
Yeah, because she does sort of mention that. She sort of says, what if I told him and then he told someone and they told someone and everyone at school would know?
Yeah, that is true. And in some ways she does exactly that, doesn't she? She goes back and goes, oh yeah, he brought his parents.
Well, she has to explain why he hasn't come to the party.
You could just say he got sick.
I know.
Or something.
So she tells them a half-truth. She tells them the first part but doesn't explain why he brought his parents.
But they automatically assume that he's crazy.
Yeah.
They make crazy jokes.
And actually that then perpetuates her feeling that she can't open up to them, because then they've just mocked somebody who does have a mental health illness. So why would she open up to someone
who is getting mocked? Yeah.
When actually they are very supportive when they do find out.
In the end of the book, yeah.
But it takes a long time for that to happen. But yeah, the fact that they mock him just sort of supports her feelings that actually if she tells them, she'll lose them.
And again, it kind of shows the deficiency in our ability as a society to discuss mental health issues.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I'm open. I wouldn't say I was proud, but I'm much more open to talking about the issues that I face than I have in the past.
I still find that, because when I do talk to people about doing this podcast, about mental health issues, about having them in the past or seeing a counsellor now, I do almost second guess, do I tell this person before I tell someone? Because I wonder what their reaction's going to be.
I must admit, I kind of got over the fact about their reaction. But then I guess in some ways there are other things that I say to people that make them even more shocked. So maybe that's just me.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just the effect I have on people. But I've got to the point where I'm trying to be true to myself about things. And I think this book does a fantastic job of showing you that even though people are out there talking about mental health, that the stigma still persists and that there is work that still needs to be done.
Yeah. Especially as I think it raises the issue of what are we teaching teenagers about it, and as parents, as teachers, as you know, the wider world around this teenager, they are not helping them to understand and to believe and to accept themselves with it. And, you know, we are talking as, you know, we're now in our third decade. And
yeah, all right then.
We're in our 30s now and only just accepting who we are, and it's taken us this long. And, you know, and you do look back, and most people you talk to who get to their 30s or their 40s, they say, you know, I became easier with myself as I got older, especially I think women. And I do think that it's society perpetuating it. And that's a really interesting part of this book, is that because it's part of the Spinster Club series of books, we've only read this first one, but this one has a theme of feminism going through it, which I particularly liked.
Me too. And we thought another friend would really like this as we were reading it. So we're definitely recommending this one to her.
Yeah, and I think the way that it talks about...
We shouldn't necessarily define ourselves through men. And I think that as a teenager, particularly when you look at Jane, so Jane is Evie's best friend, and she almost rewrites who she is for this guy Joel and pulls away from Evie. And yeah, why should women be defined by what men expect? And they talk about the Spinster Club and the guys that they're with laugh and joke about it, and doesn't that mean something derogatory that you're never going to get a man and stuff?
And they do
of course it does.
And they do turn around and say, well, what is the equivalent male word? And
exactly,
there isn't one.
There isn't.
You say you're a bachelor as a male, but that doesn't have a negative connotation. Spinster has a negative connotation. And throughout history, history teacher moment, women who are on their own have been seen as, suspicious. Like, that's the women that were accused of being witches, and, the weird woman who lived in a house down the road on her own. It's just, even the woman that lives in a shoe nursery rhyme is based on a woman that lives on her own, and she is considered very strange. I mean, she does have a lot of children and she lives in a shoe, but because
really, it's not really those things.
Yeah, but even the word hysteria, and it says this in the book, but it was a fact that we were
knew
saying
before.
Yeah. So the word hysteria actually comes from the Latin for womb and for hysterical, and
that the womb is moving around the body that makes us crazy.
Yeah,
as women.
And this used to be a belief, and I remember studying and seeing this picture of this woman who they used to tilt women to try and get their womb to stop wandering around the body and head back to where it should be. And they used to sometimes put something nice smelling down near the bottom, and bad smelling near the top end, to try and also not only tip it but also encourage it back to where it should be. Utter nonsense. The images are very funny if you ever get to see any of them. But this is all based on the fact that they thought that this womb wandering around the body was actually causing women to become too emotional, or not have enough emotion, or become hysterical, as they called it, And the fact that hysterical comes from a female word just shows you how it's meant to be a female connotation. If we are too emotional, or too mental, or the psycho ex-girlfriend because they wanted to know if you actually had feelings, and I think they really sum that up really well in the book, that she goes on a rant, which obviously I know I am right now. And
we like your rants though, so keep going.
She goes on this rant that she's written this whole speech down with her counsellor, who turns out to also be a feminist.
Woohoo!
And she, has a Spinster Club meeting, and she goes on about how mental health and women are really driving each other. But what I thought was really good, that she doesn't just go on about how women are having mental health issues because of the stigmas around being a woman, about, all the pressures there are, but also men are having mental health issues because of the male side of that actually if women are too emotional, they get called hysterical and stuff. If male are, they get called a woman, or you're being girly.
That's not fair, is it really? And no. I must admit, I have to confess, I probably have used that as in a funny way, and I now
you
am
threw
much
that like
more
a
conscious.
girl.
Yeah.
Why is that? And then there's been whole campaigns about not saying things like a girl, and not saying
sometimes
man
I
up.
slip.
Yeah, and you do. And, as a teacher, I hear it around school, people saying, oh, why didn't they just man up? And you're just like, well, actually, owning your feelings and allowing yourself to have feelings. But does that mean we need to actually come up with new language to actually express what it means to be too emotional? Because actually at the moment, if you are too emotional as a woman, you are called hysterical, you are called a psycho, you are called, whatever. It's just not, maybe we need to actually come up with new ways. Femme fatale. So I think it's really good that these girls take the word spinster and they say, well, actually being a spinster is being an independent woman who is strong and believes in feminism and believes in equality. And I thought that was really good, and I loved that part of it.
Do you know?
Rant over.
Do you know, when I got married, on my marriage certificate, I was put down as a spinster.
Yeah.
That was before they've changed the rules. You can now not be a spinster, you can be a single lady.
I saw a friend of mine got married in a church, and they said the words, who gives this woman to this man?
Well, that would be me, because I'm going to give myself to him, not anyone else.
Her father stepped up and did it, and she had allowed this to happen in the ceremony. She knew this was happening, and it was you can opt out of this. And she had allowed it because she
Is it tradition?
It is tradition. It came from, you were owned by your father until you were married, then you were given to the man, and you were then the male property. Women weren't allowed to own property in their own right until the late Victorian times, and so you weren't even allowed to divorce. Only men were allowed to apply for divorces. Women weren't given that right.
A bit harsh.
It was really bad. So women have been through a lot to try and get those equalities. And now I suppose it's the only bit, apart from walking down the aisle, that the father of the bride really gets to have a role. So I think that's why people still do it, to give them a role and a say in the day. And if you are close to your father, you might want them to be involved. But for me, I was very much like, I don't get given by anybody. I'm a grown woman. I am an
independent woman. Back off.
And I do think that maybe we need to think about those kind of parts of our society and how they play out in young minds.
Also, talking about the way we are phrasing things, how many times have you heard the phrase uttered by someone who doesn't have OCD? Oh, I like to put everything in order. I am so OCD today.
Yeah.
And that isn't necessarily the best.
Or people that go, oh, OCD moment.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
You're not having an OCD moment. You're just having a moment where you are particularly particular.
Yeah. Where where you're having a moment where you like things organised or you like things clean.
And you like things in a certain way.
Yeah. That's not OCD.
Not in any way, shape or form is it OCD. And I don't know about you, but I may have been guilty of that as well. But I'm now, as a result of doing this, I'm much more conscious of the words and the phrases that I'm using. I even am conscious of not calling my dog a girl, you're being such a big girl, when he's crying because he wants to be with me. Yeah. And it's just that thought process.
Because actually, why can't he just be a soppy male dog?
And he is a soppy male dog, and he does like attention, and he's very needy in comparison to my female dog, who is a terrier and is very independent. But why shouldn't he? And if he wants a cuddle, why shouldn't I be able to give him a cuddle?
Yeah, it's so true. And we do need to work on the way that we talk. I know that I say things sometimes at school and I think, you know what, we shouldn't say it that way. I should say it a different way. I no longer use terms like, you know, even just calling girls and, you know, rather than young women. I've heard in an assembly somebody who stood up and went, so men, girls, teachers. And it was like, oh, sorry, hold on a sec. Women teachers, boys, girls teachers.
No.
Why men, girls? And that, to me, it's just little things like that we don't even realise we're doing, that we should maybe pay more attention to.
Yeah, I used to have someone that I worked with in Australia who had great offence when someone came in and said, hello, ladies.
Yeah.
And I
hear the ladies in the office all the time, and some people have said to me, oh, they shouldn't say that because, you know, it's saying they're ladies, almost like, oh, you wouldn't have men in there. But
I must admit, I didn't necessarily take offence. I think I turned around and said they could have called me something worse.
This is true.
And let's be honest, some people might. I just think at times it's just the reason why it says hello ladies or the ladies in the office is because they're using a shortcut. If there was a guy in there, would they go the guys in the office? Would that be as much of an issue as the ladies in the office if they turned around and said the guys in the office?
Yeah.
I don't know. Something to think about and ponder, I think.
The other thing I thought the other day, I use hey guys all the time for girls, boys,
anyone,
a group
whoever.
Of people.
Yeah.
But we never use hey girls as a group. Yeah. And if I said hey girls to a group of people,
and there were boys in it,
they would probably be quite offended. But if I said it to a group of girls and went hey guys, they'd probably not bat an eyelid.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that says. It's just a comment I noticed.
It's interesting.
But yeah, I think this book did make me realise some of the things that we say and maybe thinking about some of the stereotypes that we are passing on without realising it.
Yeah, and there's also a whole section within the book that talks about I'm so OCD today. And I do think it's fair enough, and I do think it's something that should be raised, is that we shouldn't necessarily use certain words so flippantly.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I know that I used to work for a lady who at some times seemed very pleasant and then at other times was shouting at you in your face. And
she's so bipolar.
Yeah, and I've heard it well, she must be bipolar. As if like we're not allowed to have a mixture of emotions as a leader, as whatever it is. So it did make me think about things like that have happened in the past that I've heard and probably been part of that conversation and not
gone, hang on a minute, that's probably not appropriate.
Yeah.
But again, then
and what if she is?
Yeah. And also, how do you broach that subject with the other person who said it in the first place? To go, I'm sorry, I don't necessarily agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
It was also really nice in the book to see some of the techniques that Evie was trying to use to control her OCD.
Yeah, that her counsellor had introduced her to.
Yeah, so she talks extensively about using a worry tree. And if you don't know what a worry tree is, I think it's a fantastic description in the book. And I'm going to give you the points that she goes through. And point 1 is that when you start to worry, you need to put them into your worry tree. And your worry tree is like a flowchart test that you get in a women's magazine. And from that top worry, it branches into 2. Can I do anything about that worry? Yes or no? And so for the yes, if you can do something that will stop you from worrying about it, then you do it. However, if it's a no, does that lead on to a bad thought? And from that bad thought, it's important to acknowledge that thought, but then not indulge in what it is that you want to do. So, for example, if you're wanting to wash your hands several times, don't do it. Once you've got to that point and you are returning your mind to the present moment, so you're thinking something different to the worry that you originally started off with, you then go back through the process if it creeps back in again. So it's kind of like this cycle that you go back up to the, can I do anything about this at the moment? No. Then you go back through and keep bringing yourself back to the present and not indulging in the bad thoughts that you're having.
Another interesting bit that I found in the book was where she was talking about why she wanted to come off of the medication. So they'd slowly been lowering it, and she had said that that was because she wasn't sure what was her and what was the medication. So was she actually getting better, or was it the medication? Was it that she was dependent on them because she didn't like that? But also they didn't make her feel great. They thought that they made her feel puffed up and sometimes trapped in them. And then she was worried because she'd been given them earlier than you should be, that they were damaging her body. So it became this almost anxiety to be on them.
In the first place.
Yeah. Mm. And she didn't like the fact that they gave her side effects. For example, her feet were always really hot, and in the summer she had to wrap cold flannels soaked in icy water around them to try and cool them down because they felt like they were on fire. So you can see I thought it was an interesting discussion here about how it talked about the worries about the medication itself and what it was doing to your body, but also the worries about actually the side effects that these medications do give you, because none of them are perfect and they do give you side effects.
And also this concern about her self-identity and developing her self-identity during such an important phase of her life is the latter teenage years is when you start to really understand who you are as a person. And I do think that it is a valid concern that she has associated with taking these drugs.
Yeah, is she being really her, or is she being her on mind-altering medication? So she is worried that actually she can't be truly herself and find out who she is while she's taking the medication.
And I do think at the end of the book, even though it is sad because she has to go back onto the medication, it does in some ways prove to her that they were doing something. They were helping her live her life to the full potential that she wanted it to.
But also it mentioned that she doesn't have to be on them forever. Even this counsellor says, yes, you're back on them, but this doesn't mean it's forever. This doesn't mean you're going to have to do it, as part of your identity. They're not part of you,
no.
But they might have to help you along the way to be who you would like to be. And it's seeing them as something separate but helpful.
But also, if she was to come off of the medication again, she now has a better way of understanding and at what point she needs to reach out for help. And the fact that her mum is going to support her, I think that's probably another huge breakthrough for Evie in this book, is that the consequences of having an issue with her OCD is not that the world is going to end. It's just that she may need additional help and support and medication.
And actually, she has a better support system because of this second relapse. It means that everyone around her is kind of more accepting of what happened the first time and moved on from that, rather than where before I think they all thought it was just a one-off and it would sort itself out.
And I think that might be a common misperception with mental health issues, or with some mental health issues anyway, that once you've had it once and you've got better and you've recovered, then you don't have to worry about it ever again.
Yeah.
Which may be the case for some people, as we often say, everyone is an individual, but that might not necessarily be the case. There's going to be times when you fluctuate, and there are times when you're going to find it harder than others.
But hopefully she'll start to learn that it's not her weakness, because when she first talks about that medication, she says she hated how it made her feel weak for going on them in the first place, as if she
could do something about it.
Yeah, like she wasn't strong enough and therefore she had to go on them, rather than she has a mental health issue and therefore she had to go on them.
There's some kind of guilt associated with taking the medication, I thought.
Yeah, and I definitely think that there is a stigma around medication, because I know when I first went on medication a long time ago now, even my own family were like, well, why can't you deal with it without that?
My grandma is exactly the same. She has this thing where she's completely against medication. She's like, I'm not taking pills, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. Whereas, unfortunately, I need to take the antidepressants to get out of bed in the morning. I need to be taking the medication to slow down the progression of my multiple sclerosis. And there are people out there that need to take this medication to continue to live.
Yeah.
And you can't say that everyone shouldn't be taking medication. If that's your personal choice, that's your personal choice. Don't push it onto other people.
Yeah.
And I don't think she's happy that I take antidepressants.
No, but at the end of the day, she has no real... She shouldn't judge you for that, because actually, first of all, it's our own individual choices whether we take it or not. And second of all, why is there a stigma around it? A lot of these things, they have proved there is a chemical imbalance in the brain, and that's why these things occur. If they can help with getting the chemicals to a state of reasonable normality, or with normal ranges, so that you can then deal with the other things going on, then I can't see any issues at all. However, like she discusses, there are side effects that actually you've got to weigh up the benefits against the side effects of these things.
Yeah.
And that all comes down to personal choice.
Yeah, I think so too. It's the individual who has the need for the medication rather than anyone else that should be dictating what they do.
Definitely.
And anyway, I went and got myself a tattoo, so she's probably more concerned about the fact that I'm wandering around with tattoos than she is now with my medication taking. So yeah, maybe that's the way to deal with it. If someone has an issue, no, probably not, I shouldn't say this, but if someone has an issue with taking medication, just go out and get a tattoo. That'll just make it all better.
No, but I do think the fact that her judgments on you made you feel a certain way about having to take medication, about not getting a tattoo for a very long time because of her judgment against you.
I do think that maybe some of the borderline issues that I suffer with may have stemmed from her.
Yeah. And that is, again, the stigmas that we were talking about, being a very strict woman in the way that she is.
Yeah, my mum got a tattoo as well, and she wasn't very happy with that. But hey, my mum's tattoo is better? No, it's a bit worse. She has a devil who is smoking a cigarette on her hip. And hey, mine's not anywhere near that bad.
No. So, thank you so much for listening to us rambling on and in our feminist rants. And I hope you'll join with us next time.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Mental Health Book Club podcast. If you feel that you need additional support with your mental health, please call the Samaritans on 116 123, which is a 24-hour helpline. And if you need additional information about mental health issues, please visit Mind at mind.org.uk. Our next podcast will be about obsessive compulsive disorder, and our next book will be Etched on Me by Jen Crowell. You can find out more by visiting our website, which is mentalhealthbookclub.com. We would really love to hear what you think about this podcast. Please get in touch with us at our Facebook page, which is the Mental Health Book Club, or at our Twitter, which is at MHBC_podcast. And if you like the podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. You can further show your support by contributing to the Mental Health Book Club podcast at Patreon by visiting patreon.com/MHBC.